My name is Andrew Callan, and the account I'm about to give contains exactly 900 words. I offer it with the understanding that accuracy is the only way I can live with what my father finally confessed to me earlier today, here in the boundaries of Redwood National Park. I had not expected this day to become the point at which my family's history split into before and after, nor had I imagined that the truth about my uncle would arrive with such clarity, stripped of rumor, myth, and the evasive half-answers that defined my childhood. Yet by the time the sun started rising between the coastal ridges this morning, my father had already asked me to drive him out here. By the time it set, he had undone every safe assumption I had about what happened to his older brother, Michael. The day began too calmly for what it would become. I picked my father up from his small house near Arcata just after dawn, finding him already standing outside with his jacket zipped and his old hiking boots laced, like he'd been waiting since the middle of the night. He's 72 but looks older, worn in a way that has nothing to do with illness and everything to do with carrying a story for too long. He didn't greet me the way he usually did. Instead of a joke or a complaint, he simply opened the passenger door, sat down slowly, and said that we needed to settle something. I didn't ask what. Something in his voice told me it was finally time. The drive toward the park wound through tall redwoods that blocked most of the early light, giving the road an underwater feeling. I grew up around these forests, but my father's silence made them feel foreign. I kept glancing over to see if he'd start talking, but his eyes stayed fixed on the passing trees, like he expected to recognize one of them. I knew, even before he said anything, that whatever he was about to tell me wasn't just an anecdote. My uncle disappeared in this park 41 years ago. The search lasted weeks. Theories ran wild. My father never entertained any of them publicly and shut down every time I asked privately. Now, for the first time, he had asked to return to the exact area where his brother vanished. We parked near the Lost Man Creek trailhead. It wasn't an official destination when my uncle went missing. Back then, it was just an overgrown service path that connected old logging roads. My father stepped out of the car stiffly, taking in a slow, careful breath like he was tasting old air. I followed him without comment, letting him set the pace. The trail sloped gently downward at first, needles soft under our boots, the forest impossibly tall around us. Despite the calmness of the place, my father moved like someone retracing steps he'd memorized decades ago. A quarter-mile in, he stopped beside a fallen redwood that lay split in half, its interior rotting. I almost asked if this spot meant something, but he spoke first. "Your uncle died right here," he said. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was a flat statement of fact, delivered like he was finally returning a borrowed sentence. I didn't know what to say. The official report had claimed my uncle walked off alone from their campsite and never returned. That assumption implied a disappearance deeper into the forest, not a death practically within earshot of the trailhead. My father placed his hand on the mossy bark as if steadying himself. His voice wavered but didn't break. "He fell," he added, glancing toward the steep slope to our right. It dropped sharply into a narrow ravine, choked with ferns and slick mud. We were teenagers. We thought we were invincible. We left the main trail because he wanted to show me something. Some stupid shortcut he claimed he'd found. The ravine wasn't something anyone should attempt to descend without ropes. I walked closer to the edge and spotted the remnants of what looked like an old, narrow animal track. It was easy to imagine two young men losing footing there. My father watched me, and for a moment he looked like he was back in that exact year, seeing the world collapse beneath his brother's feet. "He slid all the way to the bottom," he continued, "hit his head on a rock. It was immediate." I stared at him, waiting for the part that explained the secrecy that haunted our family. Accidental falls happen. They're tragic, but they don't justify 40 years of silence. My father met my eyes, and the expression he wore made the back of my neck prickle. "He wasn't dead when I got down there," he said. "He was breathing, barely." I held his head and tried to talk to him, but the blood... God, Andrew, there was so much blood. He paused, swallowing hard. I ran for help. I was gone maybe 15 minutes, maybe 20. When I came back, he was gone. I felt the forest shift around us. Not in a mystical way, just the weight of the revelation settling into the redwood quiet. "Gone," I repeated, as in moved, crawled. My father's shoe, his head. "No," as in missing. The ravine was only 20 feet deep. My father pointed toward the far side. There were prints in the mud. Boots, not his. Someone else had been down there. A simple accident no longer explained it. And my father suddenly looked terrified, like saying it out loud in the park somehow reopened whatever danger had lurked there. Before I could speak, he added quietly, "I think someone took him." My father's words hung in the still air between the trees, and for a moment neither of us moved. The forest around us felt unchanged, but something inside it, inside the history of this place, had shifted sharply. I stepped back from the edge of the ravine, my pulse loud in my ears. I tried to picture the scene the way he must have remembered it. My uncle lying in the mud, barely alive, then gone 20 minutes later with no possibility he'd gotten up and walked away. Nothing about it made sense. Nothing except the one conclusion my father was terrified to say out loud again. "Dad," I said quietly. "Who?" This was the 80s. There weren't many people out here. "That's exactly why," he answered. This area was practically empty then. No tourists, no weekend hikers, just loggers sometimes, and even they didn't come down this far on foot. Whoever it was, they knew these trails better than we did. He rubbed the side of his jaw, fingers trembling. It was the first physical sign of fear I'd ever seen from him. "When I got back to the bottom," he continued, "the prints were fresh, a single pair, heavy boots, the kind that leave a deep impression even in packed soil. I saw where they approached Michael's body and where they dragged something away. There were marks in the mud, just faint enough that I could pretend I misread them. I tried to steady my breathing. I glanced at the ravine again, imagining the cold mud clinging to my father's hands 40 years ago as he stared at those tracks. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice level. "The search teams, the rangers, someone could have helped." He exhaled shakily. "I tried." He said it with a broken, embarrassed laugh. "Andrew, I was 16, a scared kid. I told one of the rangers about the prints. He dismissed them immediately, said I was in shock, that animal tracks can look like anything to a panicked mind. And when they kept pushing the idea that Michael just wandered off, He looked away. I let them. It was easier. Easier than admitting I'd left him alone long enough for someone to take him. He didn't raise his voice, but every word was torqued with guilt. I felt a tight ache in my chest, something I hadn't felt since I was a kid watching him stare at old photographs during anniversaries he thought I didn't notice. It wasn't just guilt over the accident. It was guilt over abandoning the truth. We stood in silence for a while, listening to distant woodpeckers tapping against high trunks. The sun had climbed higher, thinning the shadows, but the forest felt no less oppressive. I slid my hands into my pockets, trying to ground myself. "So why now?" I asked. "Why tell me today after all this time?" He blinked slowly, as if preparing himself for something heavier. "Because I need you to hear the rest," he said. "And because we're going there." I frowned. "Where?" He pointed deeper along the trail. Not the maintained portion, but the faded path that branched off and climbed gradually into denser brush. The kind of unofficial route that only locals or old rangers ever used. "There's something I never showed anyone," he said. "Not even the search teams. I was too afraid, too ashamed. But I'm done carrying it alone." A cold prickle ran down my arms. "You have something from that day?" "Not something," he said. "Somewhere." Despite the apprehension tightening my stomach, I nodded. He started walking and I followed. The trail narrowed quickly, swallowed by sword ferns that brushed against our legs. My father's pace was slow but determined, like he'd walked this hidden route 100 times in his head. I never realized how well he knew this forest, or how much of it he'd avoided for decades. We climbed gradually for 20 minutes. The canopy thickened overhead, leaving only streaks of sunlight that looked like thin, hesitant beams cutting through the haze. The temperature dropped. My father stopped occasionally to catch his breath, but he never hesitated about the direction. Finally, we reached a small clearing, if it could even be called that. A patch of open ground surrounded by tightly packed redwoods, the earth uneven, covered in a sprawl of roots that had grown over time like tightening fists. He stood in the center, breathing hard. "This is it," he said quietly. "This is where I found the second set of prints." My breath hitched. "Second set? I thought you said there was only one pair." "There was," he replied. "But that day when I panicked and ran back for help, I didn't go straight to the ranger station. I stopped here first." "Why?" He swallowed. "Because I heard someone. A voice. I thought Michael was calling for me." The forest, despite its vastness, suddenly felt too small. The idea of a dying teenager calling out from somewhere deeper in these trees, that was enough to make the air feel sharp in my lungs. My father pointed to the edge of the clearing where a faint depression ran between two large roots. "There used to be a shelter there," he said. "A makeshift one. Branches, tarps, bits of scrap wood. It wasn't new. Someone had been living here. I don't know for how long." The implications crashed into me all at once. Someone living deep in a barely used section of Redwood National Park. Someone who knew the terrain, the ravines, the hidden paths. Someone with the strength to drag an unconscious teenager through steep forest. I crouched beside the dirt, touching the roots, imagining the structure that once sat there. "Dad," I said quietly, "you knew someone was camped here? Before the search teams even started." He nodded, shame and fear warring on his face. "I lied," he whispered, "to everyone. I told them I didn't see or hear anything. But I did. I heard movement. I saw footprints leading toward this shelter. And I was so afraid they'd blame me for bringing Michael off the trail, I kept my mouth shut." A long, painful silence grew between us. Then he said something that pushed the day into a darker place than I was prepared for. "I came back the next morning," he said, "and the shelter was gone." My father didn't wait for my reaction. He just kept walking toward the stream, following a narrow animal path lined with damp moss and half-rotted logs. I hurried to keep up, my boots slipping more than once on the slick ground. He moved faster than before, almost with a sense of urgency, though I couldn't tell whether that urgency came from memory or fear of what we might find now. The forest felt heavier, quieter, as if the deeper we pushed, the more it absorbed the sound of our steps. The stream was shallow, barely a foot deep, but it sliced through the forest floor cleanly, revealing wide patches of exposed mud along the banks. My father crouched beside the water and stared at a spot downstream. I followed his line of sight. First I didn't see it. Then it clicked. A boot print. Modern. Sharp edges. No water erosion. I felt my breath catch. "Someone's been here recently?" I whispered. My father didn't answer right away. He placed his hand just above the print without touching it, his jaw tightening in a way that told me he wasn't surprised. "I thought I heard him," he murmured, voice barely above the murmur of the water. "This morning, before you came. I didn't want to believe it." I stared at him. "You think this is the same person from 40 years ago?" He stood slowly, and for a moment he looked so old I had to fight the urge to take his arm. "Not necessarily the same person," he said, "but someone like him, someone who knows these woods well enough to live in them without being seen." The idea made my stomach sink. Redwood National Park was massive, yes, but it wasn't untouched wilderness. Rangers patrolled. Tourists hiked. It wasn't the kind of place someone could hide indefinitely. And yet my father was looking at the evidence like it confirmed something he'd always known. Whoever dragged my uncle away had not just stumbled through. They belonged to this place. We followed the stream for another 10 minutes, scanning both banks. The boot prints appeared sporadically, sometimes one, sometimes a partial imprint, always facing east, deeper into the old logging area that hadn't been maintained since the 70s. My father stopped near a bend in the creek where the ground rose sharply on both sides, creating a natural funnel. He pointed to a depression in the foliage. "He used to climb here," my father said. "I heard the branches snapping that day. I thought it was an animal." He touched the rough bark of a low-hanging branch, then let his fingers trail away. "But Michael," he tried to call my name. I heard it, faint, like someone had a hand over his mouth. My skin crawled. "Dad, why didn't you tell the search teams that? They would have swarmed this whole area." He looked at me, and the pain in his eyes was something I wasn't prepared for. Because I didn't trust myself. I was a kid who left his dying brother alone in a ravine. I didn't think anyone would believe me when I said I heard voices. He inhaled shakily, and because part of me hoped I was wrong, that maybe I imagined all of it. We pressed on until the trees opened into a narrow corridor, something halfway between a washed-out logging road and an abandoned utility path. The earth was firmer here, and the tracks, boot prints, deep and crisp, were unmistakable, fresh, within the last 24 hours at most. I crouched beside one and measured it with my hand. "Large," I said quietly. "Size 12? 13? My father nodded. "Same as the ones I saw decades ago. Same tread pattern too, or close to it." He paused. "Work boots. The old kind. Thick soles. Not hiking boots." I felt a cold, rational fear settle in my gut. There was nothing supernatural or dramatic about this. It was simple, human. Someone had been living out here long enough to know the land intimately. Someone large enough, strong enough, to drag a teenager through steep forest without leaving clear signs. Someone who didn't want to be found. And today we were walking straight toward him. The trail wound upward, flanked by dense underbrush that made progress slow. After a few minutes, the air changed. It smelled faintly of something metallic, like rust or old tools left out in rain. My father slowed, scanning the ground. "We're close," he said. I didn't ask how he knew. Something about the stillness felt unnatural. Not supernatural, just deliberately quiet, like the surroundings were waiting for us to choose our next step. A crow called overhead and the sound made me jump. Then my father crouched suddenly, grabbing my sleeve. "Look!" Ahead, partially hidden behind a cluster of sword ferns, was the faint outline of a structure. Not a house, not a real shelter, more like a lean-to made of scavenged boards and branches, reinforced in places with old metal sheets. My heart thudded so hard I felt it in my throat. It wasn't new, but it wasn't old enough to be from the 80s either. We approached slowly. The ground around the structure was disturbed. Mud churned, leaves pressed down, debris scattered. Signs of recent movement. My father reached out and touched one of the support beams, his fingertips tracing the rough texture. "This isn't the original," he whispered. "The first one was smaller, but it was here, in this exact spot." The door, if it could be called that, was a piece of plywood leaning awkwardly against the opening. My father hesitated, then slowly pushed it aside. Inside was nothing at first glance, just darkness. Then my eyes adjusted, and I saw the objects arranged along the dirt floor. Blankets bundled tightly, a rusted metal cup, a rope coiled neatly, a small stack of canned food with labels faded by moisture, and beside them, a torn scrap of red fabric. My father reached down with a shaking hand and lifted it. The color was dull, almost brown now, but I recognized the type of fabric immediately. Thick, durable, the kind used for old outdoor jackets. "That looks like," I started. "My brother's," he finished. His voice broke on the last word. Before I could respond, a sound drifted through the trees behind us. Footsteps, heavy ones. My father's eyes widened. Someone was coming. The footsteps were deliberate, slow, heavy, spaced far enough apart to signal confidence rather than caution. My father's hand clamped onto my forearm, his grip surprisingly strong. He didn't need to speak. I could feel the tremor in him, the instinctive recognition of a sound he hadn't heard in 40 years but had never forgotten. We both stepped back from the shelter, moving silently through the ferns until we were partially hidden by a thick, fallen log. My father crouched. I followed. The footsteps grew louder. Whoever it was didn't try to mask their approach. Branches snapped under their weight. Gravel shifted. Leaves compressed with slow crunches that sounded too close, too certain. I held my breath, listening for any shift in the rhythm, any sign that this person knew we were there. My father closed his eyes, jaw clenched, counting the footfalls like he was back in that ravine again. Then the steps stopped. I could see him through the slats between two ferns. Not clearly, just the lower half of his legs from where we crouched. Work boots, thick-soled, scuffed and caked with dried mud. Dark pants stiff with dirt. He walked the last few feet toward the shelter, pausing at the entrance where the plywood door now leaned crookedly from where my father had moved it. He stepped inside. My father grabbed my sleeve and whispered, barely audible, "We need to move. Now." But the moment we shifted, a board inside the shelter creaked. The man stopped moving. The silence that followed was absolute. No birds, no wind, nothing but our shallow breaths. Then a single word echoed from inside the shelter, low and rasping. "Hello." My father froze. The sound wasn't directed toward us. It was spoken into the empty interior, as if the man expected someone to be there, someone who belonged. He took another step inside, his boots crunching softly on the leaves. My father tugged my shoulder and motioned for us to edge backward, staying low. The man didn't seem to hear us. He was too busy inspecting whatever we'd disturbed. We crept a few yards away, using the thicker undergrowth as cover. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. My father whispered, "He knows someone's been here. He'll check the path. We have to get off it." We veered left, cutting through a patch of ferns that brushed against our knees. My father led us toward a slope dense with fallen branches and tangled roots. It wasn't a trail. It wasn't even safe. But that was the point. He knew how to move quietly. I tried to mimic him as best I could, avoiding dry sticks, stepping only on mossy patches. But then the footsteps resumed, and this time they were faster. He'd come out of the shelter. My father looked back and gave me a quiet signal with his hand. Faster. I pushed through the brush, ignoring the scratches on my arms, and tried not to imagine those boots following behind us. After a minute, the footsteps slowed again, then stopped entirely. My father held up a hand and we froze. Nothing but forest noise now, the distant caw of a raven, the faint rush of wind through the high canopy, the trickle of the stream far behind us. "Maybe he doesn't know where we went," I whispered. My father shook his head. "He knows this place too well." We stayed perfectly still for nearly a full minute. I strained to listen for any hint of pursuit, but the forest swallowed everything. My father slowly exhaled. "We need to get back to the main trail," he said quietly. "It's the only safe place. If we stay off the path, he'll track us. If we get back on it, at least other hikers might pass by." "But the boot prints," I said. "He's been near the main trail too." "Yes," my father answered, "but not near the trailhead. He keeps to the old paths. He avoids open areas. He's afraid of being seen." That was somehow worse. Someone who hid long enough to become a ghost among the redwoods. We angled northwest, toward where the terrain sloped upward. My father navigated with certainty, even though 40 years had passed. I could see the exhaustion setting into his shoulders, but fear kept him moving. I checked behind us constantly, expecting to see the man's silhouette threading through the trees. We reached a ridge that overlooked a shallow basin. Through the dense ferns, I spotted a flash of movement far below. Someone stepping into a patch of sunlight, stopping, scanning the forest. The man. He stood perfectly still, shoulders squared, head turning slowly. I watched, barely breathing, as he crouched and examined the ground. Then he stood again and moved in a straight line toward where we had been minutes earlier. He was tracking us. My father tugged my sleeve urgently. "We need to keep moving." We climbed the ridge until the trees thinned and shafts of sunlight broke through the canopy. The forest looked calmer here, less ancient and suffocating. But deep down I knew it wasn't safety. It was just a different kind of exposure. "We can cut toward the East Trail junction," my father said between breaths. "Half a mile, maybe less." We moved in silence. My father's steps grew uneven. He paused once, gripping a tree trunk as he caught his breath. I reached for him, but he waved me off. "I'm fine. Keep going." We approached a stretch of forest with younger growth, thinner trunks, and patches of open ground. Felt wrong, too open, too visible. My father must have felt it too because he slowed, scanning the area. Then he crouched suddenly. I dropped beside him. On the ground ahead were 2 new sets of prints. Our prints. And next to them a third pair. Same heavy tread. Same boot. And they overlapped ours. "He was ahead of us," I whispered. "No," my father murmured, voice tight. "He circled." My chest tightened. This wasn't random. This wasn't an encounter or coincidence. This was someone who had lived in these woods for decades, navigating them like a second skin, using their silence and complexity the way other people use roads. He was hunting. My father grabbed my arm. "We're going to run now," he said. "Stay behind me. Keep your head low. Don't stop for anything." "What if he's close?" I asked. "He is," my father said. "That's why we're running." Before I could speak, a sound cracked from somewhere behind us. Sharp, sudden, a snapped branch. Too close. My father whispered one word. "Run." And we did. We ran blindly at first, crashing through the ferns, ducking beneath low branches, our breath ragged in the cold forest air. I stayed close on my father's heels, matching his movements as best I could. He moved with surprising agility for his age, fear sharpening every step, pulling strength from some buried part of him that refused to let history repeat itself. The forest blurred around us, the towering redwoods streaking past like pillars in a massive, ancient cathedral. Behind us, I could hear movement. Not constant, just enough to let us know he was there. A heavy footfall now and then, a branch shifting, leaves crunching lightly. Whoever he was, he wasn't sprinting. He didn't need to. He knew the terrain better than we did. He could track us with precision, follow our panic like a scent trail. My father suddenly veered right, pulling me toward a rise in the terrain. "Up here," he gasped. "Higher ground." We scrambled up the slope, hands grabbing whatever roots we could find. Dirt crumbled under our fingers, but we climbed, slipping and regaining footing in frantic bursts. At the crest, we both paused just long enough to listen. Silence. Not true silence, just the kind designed to hide something. The forest wasn't empty. It was holding its breath. My father pointed toward a break in the trees where sunlight cut through in thin shafts. "The junction's that way," he whispered. "If we can reach it, we can make for the Lost Man Creek Trail. People use that daily." I nodded, though something in me didn't believe we'd reach it before he did. Still, we pushed forward. The ground here was softer, covered in fresh needles that muted our steps. But the forest was denser too, branches clawing at our arms, ferns snagging our legs. My father was panting harder now. I could hear the strain in every breath. "Are you okay?" I asked. He waved me off, leaning briefly against a trunk. "Keep going. Don't stop. I'm right behind you." I moved ahead, glancing back to make sure he kept up. He did, but slower each minute. Sweat had soaked the collar of his shirt. Fear made his steps unsteady. When a root caught his boot and nearly sent him tumbling, I doubled back and steadied him. "I'm not leaving you," I said. He nodded weakly. "I know, but we can't slow down." We continued, pushing through a narrow corridor of close-packed trees. The sunlight grew brighter ahead, and I felt a small surge of hope. The forest floor opened slightly, sloping downward toward a shallow meadow of waist-high ferns. It wasn't safe, it was too exposed, but it was the only route forward. We stepped into the clearing and froze. Boot prints, dozens of them, not old, recent, winding across the meadow in looping paths that made no logical pattern. Some led toward the creek, some doubled back. Some circled a single large stone in the center like the person had walked around it repeatedly. It was a map made by someone who didn't want to be understood. My father whispered, "This is wrong. This is all wrong." Before I could respond, a soft scrape sounded from the far edge of the meadow. He stepped out from behind a cluster of trees. The man. He wasn't towering or monstrous, just large, broad-shouldered, his hair long and gray, his face partly shadowed by the strands. His clothes were ragged, patched with mismatched fabrics. His boots, the same heavy ones we'd been tracking, were caked with fresh mud. His posture was relaxed, almost casual, like he'd been expecting us. My father's breath hitched sharply. He whispered something I couldn't fully catch, something like a remembered name. The man watched us without blinking. No rage, no fear, no surprise, just recognition. My father spoke first, voice rough. "Where is my brother?" The man didn't answer. He tilted his head slightly, studying my father like someone examining an old photograph with faded details. Then his gaze flicked to me, assessing, calculating. I stepped slightly in front of my father, instinct overriding every rational thought. The man's eyes followed the movement, and something flickered across his expression. Interest? Amusement? I couldn't tell. Then he spoke. "You came back." My father went rigid. "I didn't come back," he said. "Not then. Not when I should have." The man took one step forward. My father grabbed my wrist. "Stay behind me." But the man didn't advance further. He paused near the stone in the center of the meadow and crouched. His movements were fluid, practiced. He placed his hand on the stone and brushed away a layer of leaves and dirt. Underneath was something metallic, a rusted tin can. He tapped the lid with one finger. My father inhaled sharply. "No," he whispered. "No, you didn't." The man nudged the can toward us. I took a step closer, unable to help myself. My father tried to pull me back, but I shook my arm free. I knelt slowly, heart thundering, and examined the object. It was old, crushed around the edges. Something was inside, rattling faintly. My father's voice cracked. "Don't open it." But the man's stare burned through me, steady and unblinking, waiting. Against every instinct I had, I pried the lid open. Inside were teeth, small, cracked, yellowed at the edges. Human. I staggered back, while burning my throat. My father pressed a hand to his mouth. "Oh God!" The man stood again. He didn't smile, didn't show triumph or glee. His face remained blank, impassive. Then he pointed his finger at my father and said, in a soft, almost conversational tone, "He stayed with me." My father's knees buckled, but the man wasn't done. He pointed at me next. "Now you." I grabbed my father under the arms before he fell completely. He stared at the man with hollow, devastated eyes, whispering only one sentence, over and over. "He didn't die, he didn't die." The man stepped forward, not rushing, just closing the distance. Deliberate, certain, hunting, and I realized with perfect, chilling clarity, he didn't want revenge. He wanted replacement for the brother he stole. My father's weight sagged against me, his legs barely holding him upright as the man advanced. I could feel his breath coming in shallow, broken gasps against my shoulder. The words he kept whispering, "He didn't die, he didn't die," rattled through me like a fever. My uncle hadn't simply been taken. He'd been kept. For how long, I didn't know. Long enough to leave those teeth behind. Long enough for this man to believe he could replace him. The man's boots pressed into the meadow floor with slow, unhurried certainty. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't brandish a weapon. He didn't need to. Every movement told us that he had all the time in the world, that we were already inside his territory, already within the invisible ring of his advantage. The forest belonged to him, and we were intruders who had wandered in the same way my uncle had. My father was shaking so hard that I had to wrap an arm around him just to keep him upright. "Dad," I whispered urgently, "listen to me. We have to move." He didn't respond. His eyes were locked on the man, on the monster he should have exposed 40 years ago. The guilt had paralyzed him. The man took another step, and the sound snapped me out of my own freeze. I grabbed my father's jaw, forcing him to look at me. "Dad, right now you follow me. You hear me? You follow me. We're going now." His pupils refocused just enough. He nodded, stiff and trembling. I pulled him backward, step by step, keeping my eyes on the man. He didn't speed up. He just kept coming, his expression unchanged. As if we were pieces of furniture he meant to shift into place. When my father's boot hit the edge of the clearing, I tightened my grip on his wrist. "Turn around. Move." He did, stumbling into the undergrowth as I stayed facing the man for one more agonizing second. He whispered something then, just one word. "Come." I bolted. Branches whipped against my arms as I plunged into the dense growth. My father crashed through ahead of me, breath ragged and uneven. I kept a hand on his shoulder, pushing him forward each time he slowed. We needed distance. Any distance. Enough to break the man's line of sight, enough to buy even 30 seconds. Behind us, I heard steps enter the woods. Not running, not stopping, tracking. always tracking. We angled downhill, knowing it was dangerous but having no choice. The ground tilted beneath us, mud sliding under our boots. My father nearly fell twice. Both times I caught him by the back of his jacket. "Dad, stay with me, please." He nodded weakly, tears spilling from the edges of his eyes. "I left him," he whispered. "I left him there." "You were 16, I said sharply. "He didn't die because of you. He died because of him." But even as I said it, something twisted in my stomach. Because the man's words, "he stayed with me," didn't sound like a confession. They sounded like pride. We reached a downed redwood blocking our path. Too high to step over, too wide to go around quickly. My father tried to climb it and slid back, his palms slipping against the bark. "I can't. My legs, Andrew, I can't." "You can." I crouched, braced my shoulder under his foot, and lifted. He scrambled over the log, landing hard on the other side. I vaulted after him, feeling the bark tear through my shirt and scrape my ribs. A distant crack of wood echoed behind us. He was still coming, and getting closer. My father staggered forward again, using trees to keep himself upright. I stayed beside him, half dragging him through the brush. The forest was thickening now, the terrain twisting unpredictably, slopes hidden beneath carpets of ferns. "Where's the junction?" I asked, breath burning. My father pointed weakly to the left. "Quarter mile, maybe less. Follow the slope." I tightened my grip on him and steered us that way. My legs screamed, lungs raw, but adrenaline kept us moving. Each snap of a branch behind us felt closer than the last. Then I made a mistake. I checked behind us for half a second, and in that half second my father stepped on a patch of slick moss and his foot shot out from under him. He fell hard, slamming onto his hip with a cry that tore through me. "Dad!" I dropped to my knees beside him, his face twisted in pain. "My hip, Andrew. I can't." "We don't have a choice," I said, grabbing him under the arms. But the moment I tried to lift him, he screamed in agony, his entire body tensing. A twig snapped behind us. Closer, too close. The man's silhouette slid into view between two distant trees, just 30 yards back. Close enough that I saw his eyes fix on us. My father clutched my sleeve. "Go! No! Andrew, go!" I shook my head violently. "I'm not leaving you. You have to. He'll take you too if you stay. Go." Another step from the man. Deliberate. Direct. He was closing the distance with terrifying calm. I grabbed a rock, heavy, moss-covered, and forced myself to my feet. My heart slammed against my ribs, every part of me screaming that this was hopeless. But I stood between the man and my father anyway. He stopped 15 yards away, watching, measuring. I held the rock like it meant something, like it could do anything to someone who had lived in these woods longer than I'd been alive. My hands shook so hard I almost dropped it. "Stay away from him," I said, my voice cracking. The man blinked slowly. Then he pointed first to me, then to my father. Both. He took a step. I raised the rock, useless as it was. And then, from somewhere deeper in the forest, a whistle pierced the air. Sharp, echoing, unmistakably human. The man froze. He turned his head slightly, listening. Another whistle. Closer. My father's eyes widened. Rangers? No, several voices, calling names, moving through the trees. Hikers. A group. The man's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. A tiny tension, like an animal scenting danger it knew too well. He took one step back, then another. Then he retreated into the trees, vanishing as silently as he had appeared. The forest filled again with distant voices. But the danger hadn't passed. because the man's last words still echoed inside me. Both. My father squeezed my hand weakly. "He's not gone," he whispered. "He'll wait." And the worst part was, I knew he was right. The voices drifted closer. 3, maybe 4 people. Their steps crunching through the underbrush with the careless noise of hikers who believed the woods were simply beautiful and nothing else. I stayed crouched beside my father, still gripping his hand, my heart hammering so violently I thought they'd hear it before they saw us. My father's breaths were shallow, pained, every exhale sharp enough to make his face twist. His hip was bad, maybe fractured, but I couldn't think about the long term. Only minutes, only seconds, only survival. "Andrew," he whispered, "help me up, just to stand." "You can't stand," I said. "You'll pass out. We can't be sitting when they reach us. If they see us down here, this deep, they might think we're hurt." But his eyes darted toward the trees where the man vanished. "He'll come back the second they move on." He was right. The hikers were temporary. That man, he'd already proven he could circle behind us without ever being seen. I braced my hands under his arms and helped him sit upright against a tree. Pain tore across his face, but he held onto consciousness by pure force of will. I swallowed, tasting iron in my mouth from where I'd bitten my tongue while running. "Just don't move. I'll wave them over. Then we—" "Stay with me," my father said, voice suddenly urgent. "Don't walk away from me. Not now. Not even 10 feet. Something in his tone froze me. A memory, maybe something primordial, because I realized what he feared, the man appearing between us, splitting us, taking one without the other. I nodded. "Then we make noise." I cupped my hands around my mouth. "Hello, over here. We need help." The hikers' voices grew clearer. A woman called back, alarmed. "Hello? Are you hurt? Keep talking." I shouted again, louder this time, fighting the dryness in my throat. My father squeezed my wrist, weak, trembling, but grateful. Leaves rustled to our left. My head snapped toward the sound. A branch shifted, just once. A whisper of motion. Not hikers. I tightened my grip on the rock still in my hand. "Andrew," my father murmured, "don't let him get close." "I won't," I whispered. "I promise." The hikers finally came into view, 3 of them. A middle-aged woman in a green jacket, a man in a red windbreaker, a younger guy with a camera around his neck. All 3 looked startled at the sight of us crouched beside a tree, my father pale and sweating. "Oh my God," the woman said, rushing forward. "Are you injured?" "My dad's hip, he fell. Please, we need to get him to the main trail, he can't walk," I said in a single breath. The younger guy knelt, examining my father. "Looks like a bad fall. You can't stay here. We can help carry him." My father grabbed the guy's sleeve. "We have to move now," he said, voice thin, nearly breaking. "All of us." The man in the red jacket frowned. "Why? What happened?" I hesitated. If I told them the truth, that someone was hunting us, they'd panic. They might freeze. Or worse, they might look around, trying to spot the man. That would give him time. So I kept it simple. "There's someone in the woods," I said. "He's not supposed to be out here. He's dangerous." The hikers exchanged quick glances. No disbelief, just concern. The woman turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees. "A ranger? Or—" "No," I said. "Not a ranger." The guy with the camera straightened. "Okay, we'll help you. There are more people down the trail, maybe half a mile. If we shout, they'll hear." My father shook his head. "Don't shout. Don't draw him." The woman swallowed. "All right, quiet then. Let's just move." They each took positions around my father, one under each arm, the third bracing his back. I stayed close, gripping the rock, my pulse slamming in my ears. My father hissed in pain as they lifted him, but he didn't scream. He clenched his teeth and forced himself upright. The moment he stood, a single soft sound drifted from the trees behind us. A footstep. The woman stiffened. "Did you hear?" "Yes," I said. "Walk. Walk now." We moved in a tight cluster, pushing through the undergrowth toward the ridge. The hikers tried to be quiet, but the forest betrayed every step. Snapping twigs, brushing branches, shifting dirt. My father leaned heavily on the man in the windbreaker, his face pale and tight. I kept scanning behind us. Nothing. No shape. No shadow. No silhouette. But the feeling, the awful, crawling certainty, never left my spine. We were being watched. Halfway up the slope, the younger hiker glanced back and frowned. "Do you think he's following us?" "Yes," my father whispered. We crested the ridge, and I nearly cried when I saw the faint outline of a trail. An actual marked trail, cutting through the forest 50 yards ahead. Civilization, safety, noise, people. We just had to reach it. Then, behind us, another sound broke the air. Not a footstep, not a branch snap. A laugh, low, short, empty of humor. The woman gasped, clutching my father tighter. "What was?" "Hurry," I hissed. "Please, please hurry." We surged forward, half dragging my father now. The windbreaker man stumbled but didn't stop. The camera guy swore under his breath. The trail grew closer with each frantic step, the dirt path visible through the ferns, bright with late afternoon sun. 20 feet. 10. 5. We broke onto the trail, the sudden openness so jarring my eyes stung. The group eased my father onto the path, supporting him as he sagged. "We made it," the woman whispered, but I wasn't looking at the trail. I was looking at the wall of trees we had just emerged from, at the darkness between the trunks, at the shape that slid silently into that darkness the moment we reached safety. I knew he saw the other hikers. I knew he heard their voices. I knew he understood that he couldn't take us now. Not here. Not with witnesses. But the last thing I saw before he vanished was his face turning toward me. Eyes unblinking, expression unreadable. And even from that distance, I knew exactly what that look meant. He wasn't done. Not even close. Even with the sun pouring onto the trail and the hikers forming a protective cluster around us, I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest behind us was breathing, slow, patient, waiting. My father leaned heavily on the man in the red windbreaker, every step sending tremors through his body. The pain had drained most of the color from his face, but his eyes weren't on the trail or the hikers. They were fixed behind us, watching for the man he'd been running from for 40 years. The woman jogged a few paces ahead, scanning for other hikers. "There's a ranger station about a mile down," she said. "We'll get help there. They'll bring a stretcher." My father shook his head weakly. "Rangers? They won't find him." "They don't have to find him," I said. "They just have to get you out." My father squeezed my wrist, gripping with surprising strength. "Andrew," he whispered. "He'll keep coming." He watched us. He listened. "He knows your voice now." A chill crawled cold and deep along my spine. "Dad, don't. Not now." But he wasn't wrong. I felt it too. That man's stare had burned into me in a way I couldn't put words to. A silent claim. The way a predator marks the edge of a territory, or selects its next target. The hikers urged us onward, their voices quiet but steady, trying to keep us calm. I kept looking over my shoulder every few seconds, half expecting him to step onto the trail, daring us to believe the forest belonged to anyone but him. He didn't. He wouldn't. Not here. Not where people walked. He was a shadow walker, a creature of the thick undergrowth and the hidden places. Reality made feral, and he'd simply slipped back into it. We pushed on, one slow step after another. My father stumbled, pain racking through him, but he stayed conscious. I held him up, refusing to let him fall again. 10 minutes later, we heard voices. More hikers. A family, loud and alive and blissfully unaware. I wanted to cry from relief. When they saw us, their chatter stopped instantly. The father hurried toward us, eyes wide. "Is he hurt? We need a ranger," the green jacket woman said. "He fell. There's someone out here." The man frowned. "Someone? Like a person?" I stepped in before she could explain too much. "Please, just help us get to the station." The family didn't hesitate. The father moved to take my father's arm. The teenage son hoisted my father's other side. My father groaned but didn't fight it. As we started again, my father grabbed the sleeve of my shirt and leaned in, whispering so quietly I almost didn't hear him. I heard him laugh when we ran. My blood froze. "I heard it behind me," he continued, voice small, hollow. "He laughed just like he did that day." "Dad," I whispered, "don't do this to yourself. Please." He didn't answer. We reached the ranger station 20 minutes later. The world felt surreal. Cars parked neatly, gravel crunching underfoot. A posted sign about preserving the ecosystem. Civilization felt too clean, too bright, too impossible compared to where we just escaped from. 2 rangers came out immediately. One of them, a tall man with a trimmed beard, knelt beside my father. "Sir, what happened?" My father looked up at him, and I watched the decades crack over his expression. "I found my brother," he said hoarsely. "He took my brother." The ranger blinked. "Who did, sir?" My father's hand trembled violently as he pointed toward the forest. "A man. He lives out there. He lives in the woods. I saw him today." The ranger's expression tightened the way professionals do when they're trying not to show alarm. "Okay, let's get you inside first." The second ranger looked at me. "Where exactly were you?" I opened my mouth and stopped, because how could I explain those prints, that shelter, those teeth in the tin can? How could I describe the man keeping pace with us without sounding like someone unraveling under pressure? So I told him the truth. Just not the whole truth. "There was a man out there," I said. "He followed us. We got separated from the trail and stumbled onto something. A shelter or camp. He came back while we were there." The ranger swore softly under his breath. "We've had reports of squatters, illegal camps, but nothing violent." "You're sure he followed you?" "Yes," I said. "Positive." He studied me for a moment. Then he nodded. "All right, we'll send a team out. But for now, your father needs medical attention." The rangers radioed for help. My father was eased onto a bench, wrapped in foil blankets. He was shaking uncontrollably, whispering to himself. The woman who'd helped us stayed close, rubbing his shoulder gently. An ambulance arrived 20 minutes later. As they loaded my father inside, he grabbed my wrist again. Hard. "Andrew," he rasped. "Listen, he's not done." "I know," I whispered. "No," he insisted, eyes boring into mine. "Not with me. With you." A tremor rolled through me so violently I had to lean against the ambulance door. "Dad." "He took Michael because he was alone." He swallowed, voice breaking. "He almost had you. If those hikers hadn't come." I didn't answer. Couldn't. He squeezed my wrist one last time before the paramedic gently pried his hand free. "Don't go into those woods again," he whispered. Promise me. Promise. I promise. The doors closed, and the ambulance drove away. I stood there long after it disappeared. The rangers gathered details. The hikers gave statements. Someone asked if I needed water. Someone else asked if I needed to sit. I didn't hear any of them, because I was staring at the tree line, at the darkness beyond the ferns, at the place where an old feral shape had slipped out of sight. He hadn't chased us onto the trail. He didn't have to. He'd made his point. He'd chosen. And as the sun dipped lower and shadows stretched across the dirt, something inside those trees shifted. A slow, deliberate movement, not stepping out, just repositioning, watching, waiting, because he wasn't after my father. Not anymore. He was waiting for the day I came back. And God help me, I knew one day I would.